Welcome to Tales by Tochi. These stories are real, unique and exceptional because they are from personal experiences around the African culture. Don't forget to like, subscribe and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me, and also you will be able to enjoy and learn from these amazing stories. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. Chief Obinna Okoye sat by the wide glass window of his hilltop mansion, the sun pouring in like gold against his weathered face. The once strong patriarch, a titan in Nigeria's business history and the father of the richest man in the world, now struggled to climb the stairs without assistance. His fingers trembled slightly as he held the envelope from his doctor, its contents weighing more than any billion-dollar deal he had ever signed. Stage 4 heart failure. 6 months, maybe less. He had fought wars in the boardroom and conquered continents with his investments, but death had crept in quietly without an appointment. The thought of dying wasn't what made his heart ache the most. It was the vision of Maxwell, his only son, standing alone by his graveside, no wife to hold, no child to carry his name forward. Obinna had built an empire, but what did it matter if his legacy ended with board meetings and wealth scattered across the globe? He sighed, his breath fogging the glass. His son was lonely, and yet he didn't even realize it. Trapped in glass towers and bound by numbers, Maxwell had forgotten what it meant to live for more than profit. Obinna's last mission, his true legacy, wouldn't be another investment. It would be love, family, and future. And if Maxwell refused to seek it, Obinna would bring it to him. Obinna reflected on the many women who had come and gone in Maxwell's life. Models, actresses, executives, women with beauty, poise, and ambition. Yet none had touched his son's soul. They arrived with designer bags and perfectly rehearsed smiles, but their love faded the moment they were denied access to the private jets or offshore accounts. Maxwell had become a fortress, unwilling to open his heart to another user. Obinna couldn't blame him. The world had worshipped Maxwell's wealth and despised his loneliness, celebrating his billions while gossiping about his lack of family. Obinna had watched quietly from the sidelines, helpless as his son hardened over the years. He had given Maxwell everything: education in Switzerland, business mentorship, his first capital injection. But perhaps he had failed where it mattered most. He had never taught his son how to recognize genuine love. Now, as the ticking clock inside his chest reminded him daily of what time remained, Obinna made a vow to himself. He would find Maxwell a woman who didn't care about his wealth. Someone who could see past the titles and Forbes rankings. A woman who would love his son as a man, not as a myth. But how could he find her, especially in a world that bowed before money? The plan came to him in the quiet of the evening, as he watched the hotel staff clean the mansion's west wing. He would become invisible, not as Obinna Okoye, not even as Maxwell's father, but as a cleaner. Someone lowly, someone no one would pretend to be nice to. That way he could truly see who people were when they thought they were speaking to no one. With help from his loyal assistant, Tund, who had served him for over 30 years, Obinna began the transformation. He shaved his neatly trimmed beard to stubble, dyed his gray hair darker, and traded his Italian suits for faded khaki trousers and a blue janitor's shirt. Tund pulled some strings with the staff managers at the Imperial, Maxwell's most prestigious hotel in Lagos, and secured Obinna a part-time cleaning job under a false name, Mr. Ben. It was a risk and it went against everything his pride stood for. But Obinna no longer had time for pride. He had a mission. Somewhere inside that hotel, maybe among the cooks or the housekeeping staff, was a woman who could love his son. And he would find her, not as a billionaire, but as a broken father trying to heal his family before death took him away. Maxwell Okoye stood at the top floor of his company's Lagos headquarters, surrounded by walls of glass and silence. From this height, the city looked like a toy, moving parts, blinking lights, distant voices. To the world, he was a marvel, the youngest self-made billionaire, a tech mogul turned global investor with skyscrapers on every continent. But within these walls, Maxwell was just a man wrapped in duty and deadlines. His phone buzzed non-stop with alerts from Tokyo, Dubai, and New York. Well, marriage? Children? He scoffed at the thought. His father had mentioned it again over breakfast a week ago, gently, almost pleadingly. Maxwell had waved it off. He didn't have the time or the interest. The world wanted too much from him already: investors, board members, governments. Everyone wanted a piece of the Okoye empire. He wasn't about to open his heart to someone who might only want the same. Even when Maxwell tried to entertain the idea of settling down, the memories of past relationships quickly shut the door. Women had come into his life smiling, only to leave angry when they were denied access to his fortune. One had cried because she didn't get to fly on his private jet after a single date. Another had staged a tabloid scandal claiming engagement just for fame. Over time, Maxwell stopped trying. He built emotional walls as high as his buildings. Every romantic encounter became a transaction. Dinner. Compliments. Goodbye. He couldn't remember the last time someone asked how he was doing without bringing up business or wealth. The loneliness crept in at night, when the offices were empty, and he had nothing but silence and spreadsheets for company. His father's concern felt like a pressure he didn't want to deal with, no matter how well-meaning it was. He couldn't imagine a woman existing who would love him for who he truly was, stripped of status and power. That kind of love, he believed, had died with simpler times. When Obinna called again later that week, suggesting he take a break and spend some time at the Imperial, Maxwell hesitated. He had invested billions in that hotel, a jewel of his hospitality empire. Maybe some quiet time away from the corporate noise would help him clear his head. Maybe. With a sigh, he packed a few things and ordered his driver to take him there. He didn't know that his father would arrive before him, not as a guest but as a cleaner. Nor did he know that the days ahead would change everything. His understanding of love, trust, and legacy. Maxwell Okoye, the world's richest man, was about to face the one challenge money couldn't solve: the quest for a real connection. And somewhere beneath the marble floors and polished gold of the Imperial, that challenge was waiting, wearing worn shoes and a kind smile. Disguised in a faded blue uniform and carrying a mop and bucket, Chief Obinna stepped into the service elevator of the Imperial. The luxurious aroma of fresh orchids mixed with lemon disinfectant in the hallway, and the contrast was almost poetic. This was his son's world, sparkling, controlled, prestigious. Yet Obinna was entering it from the basement. For the first time in decades, he was invisible. No chauffeur opened his doors. No assistant trailed behind him with a tablet. Guests brushed past him without eye contact, and staff barely acknowledged his presence. He moved through the corridors like a ghost, observing every smile, every smirk, every whisper. He began his days cleaning the lobby at dawn and ended them mopping the ballroom floors at night. His joints ached and the work humbled him. But every moment was a lesson, a glimpse into the hearts of people who thought no one was watching. Within days, Obinna began to notice patterns. Certain young women lingered in the lobby long after check-in, wearing high heels and tight dresses, pretending to sip champagne while hoping Maxwell would appear. When the billionaire passed through, they lit up, laughing at his jokes, pretending to admire art pieces they didn't understand. But when Obinna passed by, pushing his mop, their faces changed. One sneered and told him to clean faster. Another shoved him aside without apology. He smiled politely, took mental notes, and kept cleaning. These women didn't know they were being watched by the man who mattered most. It was painful but necessary. He needed to see who they really were when the lights dimmed and no wealth stood between them and their manners. He wasn't looking for beauty or education or charm. He was looking for humility, warmth, and truth. And then, on a rainy Thursday afternoon, he met Amara. She wasn't like the others. Dressed in a simple uniform, with tired eyes and calloused hands, she worked in the laundry room deep in the basement. Their first encounter was unremarkable. She handed him a fresh mop towel with a quiet, "Good morning." But over time, her small kindnesses became a lifeline. She once brought him hot tea when she noticed him shivering after cleaning the cold storage floor. Another time, she defended him when a rude guest scolded him for bumping into a chair. She never asked for favors, never bragged, and never once treated him like he was beneath her. To Amara, he was just Mr. Ben, the quiet old janitor with kind eyes. But to Obinna, she was a rare gem, perhaps even the one he'd been searching for. As he watched her laugh with other workers and hug her little boy during lunch breaks, something stirred in his heart. Maybe, just maybe, fate had brought him to the right place at the right time. The grand lobby of the Imperial shimmered with elegance as the midday sun poured through its crystal skylights. Gold accents gleamed on every surface, and soft classical music echoed in the background. Tourists and tycoons flowed in and out, but Obinna wasn't watching them, he was watching the women. He'd learned to keep his head down while pushing his cleaning cart, pretending to dust while his eyes observed with precision. Most of the young women who frequented the hotel came dressed to be noticed. Body-hugging dresses, designer heels, carefully styled wigs. They came with perfumes that filled entire hallways and smiles that turned on like light switches when Maxwell appeared. But Obinna wasn't interested in their beauty. He was interested in their character, how they treated the invisible people. It didn't take long before their masks slipped. One, who had introduced herself as Zara in front of Maxwell, had once thrown a used tissue at Obinna's feet and demanded he'd do his job. Another, Chioma, wore a fake accent when Maxwell was around but barked insults at kitchen staff when she didn't get her preferred table for lunch. Their true colors bled through in private, and it was clear they had no love for anyone without wealth. He began to take notes in his mind, building silent profiles. Some were more subtle than others. Women who acted sweet when cameras were on but rolled their eyes when bellboys opened doors. One afternoon he overheard two women mocking Amara, calling her the rag girl, and laughing about how her child probably didn't even have a father. They spoke in hushed tones near the staff corridor, not knowing that Mr. Ben was sweeping just around the corner. Obina's fists clenched, but he kept his calm. This wasn't the time to confront them. It was the time to remember. He had spent his entire life building an empire, and he knew how to read people beneath their masks. These women weren't interested in building a life, they were interested in inheriting one. They flirted with the idea of power, not love. And yet, whenever Maxwell entered the room, they transformed into angels. They gushed about books they never read, pretended to care about charities they couldn't name, and called Obina uncle with fake smiles just to be seen as sweet in front of Maxwell. It was almost theatrical, and deeply disappointing. Obina's resolve grew stronger. He couldn't allow any of these women to sink their claws into his son's life. Maxwell was too intelligent to fall for blatant lies, but loneliness could make any man vulnerable. What hurt Obina most was how easily people could switch faces. He remembered his late wife, a woman of grace and principle who had raised Maxwell with simple values despite their growing wealth. She would have been heartbroken to see what the world had become, a place where kindness was performed for gain and cruelty was dismissed as ambition. But there was still one light in the darkness. Mara. Her smile wasn't rehearsed, and her voice never changed whether she spoke to a manager or a maid. She treated everyone with dignity, and even when she was mocked, she walked with quiet strength. Obina's heart leaned toward her more each day, but he knew the journey ahead would be tricky. He needed to draw her closer to Maxwell, but without forcing it, and without revealing who he really was. Because true love, if it would ever bloom, had to grow in the dark, away from fame, fortune, and facades. Amara Nwachukwu was used to being invisible. Every morning she arrived before sunrise, dressed in her faded uniform, her hair wrapped neatly beneath a scarf. She worked in the laundry unit deep in the hotel's underbelly, a place no guest ever ventured. The machines were loud, the air hot and heavy with steam, but Amara endured it all with a quiet dignity. Her 5-year-old son, Chibik, was her world. She had him when she was barely 19. After the man who claimed to love her vanished into thin air the moment he found out she was pregnant. Her family had been disappointed, friends had turned away, but Amara never regretted having her child. Chibik was her hope, a bright, curious boy who lit up her small rented room with laughter and drawings. Every night after work, Amara would read to him by candlelight and promise him that one day life would get better. And every morning she came to the hotel and folded sheets, pressed uniforms, and endured whispers from other staff who thought she would never amount to more than the girl with a child and no ring. The first time she noticed Mr. Ben, he was struggling to lift a mop bucket on a slippery hallway. Most staff ignored him, too focused on their own duties, but something about the quiet old man tugged at her heart. She walked over and helped him stabilize the bucket, smiling gently. "You should ask for the lighter ones next time," she said, offering him a bottle of water from her lunchbox. He looked surprised, almost confused, then smiled back with a warmth that felt genuine. From that day on, their paths crossed more often. She'd hand him folded towels, offer him a seat near the fan during hot afternoons, and once even gave him the last of her jollof rice when she noticed he hadn't eaten. Amara never asked who he was or why he worked so slowly. She just saw a tired old man who deserved kindness. She didn't know he watched her carefully, not with judgment but with admiration. To her, kindness was second nature. She had no idea it was being tested, or that the man she treated like a janitor had the power to change her life forever. Unknown to Amara, Obina had already begun picturing a future. He could see her with Maxwell, not just as a wife but as a partner, a mother, and a grounding force. She wasn't intimidated by uniforms or titles, and she carried herself with quiet pride. Her son, Chibik, reminded Obina of young Maxwell, curious, fearless, and full of potential. But he couldn't rush things. One wrong move, one hint that she was being watched, and the whole plan could collapse. So he chose to remain silent. He continued to sweep floors and mop halls, all while imagining how he could slowly guide their paths to cross. Perhaps a delayed elevator here, a lost document there, or a moment of shared silence in the garden. He had lived a long life and learned that fate often needed a little nudge. And as he walked back to his quarters that night, Shoulders aching but spirit hopeful, he whispered a prayer into the stars. God, if this girl is the one, let love grow. Not for money. Not for status. But for truth. Obinna knew that kindness shown to the wealthy was often just strategy. But how people treated the helpless, that revealed their soul. So he decided to test the hearts around him. The women who always smiled at Maxwell, he watched them closely. He would accidentally spill a bucket of water near them to see their reaction. Most scowled. Some swore. One even called him disgusting, and asked security to move him away. But when Maxwell walked by minutes later, those same women transformed into sweet, simpering angels, greeting him in polished accents and throwing compliments like confetti. Obinna remained calm, letting the act play out. He saw through every word. These weren't future wives. They were hunters looking for a golden meal ticket. Meanwhile, Amara continued to pass each test without knowing she was being tested. Once, Obinna limped deliberately while carrying a heavy linen bag. She rushed from the laundry area to help him carry it, ignoring the curious stares of others. Another time, he dropped a food tray in the staff cafeteria and sat down defeated. She cleaned the mess without a word and handed him part of her lunch, brushing crumbs off his shirt like he was family. Her heart wasn't just pure, it was selfless. He began to share stories with her, vague tales of a friend who had a wealthy son but was worried he'd never find a good woman. Amara listened intently, sometimes laughing, sometimes thoughtful. Maybe he's looking in the wrong places, she once said. Sometimes the right woman isn't the loudest or the prettiest. She's just the one who stays when everyone else leaves. Obinna felt that deeply. Every moment with her confirmed what his soul had started to believe. This woman was different. But still he kept his disguise. His mission wasn't to impress her. It was to understand her, and more importantly, to bring her and Maxwell into each other's orbit naturally. The challenge was figuring out how. Maxwell barely noticed staff. Amara barely left her basement post. Their lives were miles apart under the same roof. Obinna would have to be the bridge, carefully, quietly, and with divine timing. So, he started to engineer coincidences. He arranged for Amara to be called upstairs to deliver fresh uniforms. He made sure Maxwell's elevator broke down briefly, forcing him to take the staff passageway where Amara occasionally walked. The first time they passed each other, Maxwell barely looked. The second time, his eyes lingered for a moment longer. And by the third, Obinna saw it, the faint flicker of interest in his son's usually unreadable face. Amara, on the other hand, blushed politely and kept moving. She had no idea who he really was, nor did she care. That was exactly what made her so rare. And as Obinna walked away that day, hiding his smile, he felt something he hadn't felt in months: hope. The plan to draw Amara and Maxwell into the same space wasn't going to succeed on chance alone. Obinna knew that too well. So, after weeks of subtle maneuvering, he orchestrated a setup disguised as coincidence. That evening, Maxwell had scheduled a late-night private dinner with one of his project directors at the hotel's rooftop garden, a serene location reserved only for VIP guests. Obinna made sure the laundry department had an emergency uniform delivery to that same floor around the same time. He suggested Amara handle it personally, insisting she was the only one who knew which specific sizes had been requested. Though hesitant, she didn't enjoy being around the upper echelons of the hotel. She agreed. The moment she stepped into the dimly lit rooftop, balancing a basket of neatly folded uniforms, Maxwell looked up from his tablet. At first, his eyes flickered with indifference. She mumbled a polite, "Excuse me," keeping her head down as she walked past. But then something about her voice, soft, unpolished, sincere, made him pause. Maxwell was used to a different kind of woman, bold, flirtatious, assertive. They came into his space with heels clicking and rehearsed smiles, always ready with compliments and subtle innuendos. But this one? She didn't linger. She didn't smile to seduce. She barely even looked at him. There was something disarming about her simplicity. "What's your name?" he asked just as she reached for the door. She turned slightly, surprised. "Amara," she said softly. "Laundry staff." He nodded, something in him unsettled, not in a bad way but unfamiliar. "Thank you," he added genuinely. She gave a short nod and disappeared into the hallway. The dinner resumed, but Maxwell's attention was gone. His guest rambled about quarterly projections while his mind replayed Amara's face. Who was she? Why hadn't he noticed her before? And why, despite her quiet presence, did it feel like she left something behind? Obinna watched from the shadows of the elevator hallway, heart fluttering. The exchange had been brief, but it was a spark, the kind he'd been waiting for. Maxwell's curiosity was piqued, and Amara, unaware of her effect, had simply returned to her duties. The beauty of it was its authenticity. There was no performance, no pretending. She hadn't tried to be noticed, and yet she had been. Obinna knew Maxwell would seek her out again, not immediately but soon. And when he did, it wouldn't be because of wealth or manipulation. It would be because something in his soul had recognized her spirit. Obinna returned to his tiny staff quarters that night with a smile. The seeds had been planted. Now he just had to give them room to grow. And perhaps, with a few more pushes in the right direction, something extraordinary could blossom under the surface of this glass and gold empire. As the days passed, Maxwell found himself more distracted than usual. His meetings were efficient, his investments steady, but something inside him had shifted. He began to notice things he once ignored: the smiles that didn't reach eyes, the fake laughs, the rehearsed words. Even the women who orbited his presence like planets felt more irritating than amusing. Sandra, one of the more persistent ones, had begun to invite herself to his lunch breaks. She always arrived in the most fashionable outfits, her perfume choking the air, and talked endlessly about her social media followers, her cosmetic line, and the charity gala she was planning. Maxwell smiled politely, but inwardly he was restless. Every conversation felt like a negotiation. Give me time and I'll give you flattery. Meanwhile, the memory of Amara's short reply, "laundry staff," replayed in his mind like a song he couldn't shake. She had spoken like someone who didn't owe the world an explanation. And that, oddly, made him want to know more. Obinna had been waiting for the perfect moment. He had collected enough evidence: stories from staff, whispered complaints, and most importantly, discreet footage captured on hotel security cameras. He compiled a small folder of video clips where Sandra and others showed their true nature: mocking waiters, insulting maids, rolling eyes at elderly staff. In one, Sandra berated a housekeeper for placing her slippers slightly off-center. "You people are too stupid to be working here," she had snapped. In another, she poured champagne on a bellboy who accidentally brushed her handbag. Obinna forwarded the videos anonymously to Maxwell's executive assistant. Within hours, Maxwell was sitting in his suite, watching the footage in cold silence. His face hardened as he clicked through each clip. The women who smiled at him daily, who called him Maxie, and feigned sweetness, they were vultures circling a golden feast. Maxwell didn't make a scene. He didn't confront anyone. But the next morning, Sandra and her clique found themselves locked out of their VIP accounts. Their personal privileges revoked. No room service, no complimentary suites, no invitations to events. The message was clear: masks had fallen. Obinna watched it all unfold with quiet satisfaction. The hotel staff buzzed with rumors, unaware of the cleaners' involvement. For once, justice had come from behind the curtains, not the boardroom. Amara, meanwhile, remained blissfully unaware. She continued to work diligently, her kindness unchanged. When she heard that some of the influencer ladies had been kicked out, she simply shrugged and returned to folding sheets. That humility, that calm detachment from drama, made Obinna even more certain. The pretenders had been exposed. Now it was time to draw the real thing forward, without pressure, without force. The air had been cleared. The stage was almost ready for love to take center. Maxwell found himself wandering through the hotel more often, something he hadn't done in years. He claimed it was to observe operations firsthand, but truthfully he was searching for her. He passed through the laundry hallway pretending to inspect cleanliness. He ordered tea from the lower-level cafeteria just to feel closer to the life she lived. Finally, one afternoon, fate did its part again. He caught her in the break room, sitting alone and reading from a second-hand novel with a creased spine. "Amara, right?" he asked. She looked up, startled, then stood quickly. "Yes, sir." He motioned for her to sit. "Do you mind if I join you?" She hesitated, unsure of what rules this might break, but finally nodded. For the next 10 minutes they talked, not as CEO and staff but as two people bridging worlds. He asked about her favorite books. She shyly admitted she liked romance novels because they gave her hope. He didn't mock her. He simply listened, genuinely intrigued. Their conversation stretched into another meeting days later, then another. Maxwell began asking for her when requesting minor services: towel deliveries, coffee setups, uniform checks. Obinna made sure she was assigned every time. To Amara, it all felt surreal, like a chapter from one of her novels. She didn't understand why the billionaire showed interest in someone like her, but she stayed grounded. She didn't flirt. She didn't brag. And she never once asked for favors. Maxwell noticed this more than anything. She treated him like a man, not a wallet. Slowly he opened up. He told her about his mother, about how her death left a hole no success could fill. He shared his fears, of being used, of building an empire and dying alone. Amara didn't offer clichés. She simply said, "You don't have to be alone, but you do have to let someone in." It was such a simple truth, and yet it landed deeper than any advice he had received from therapists or friends. By the end of that week, something in Maxwell began to soften. He laughed more. He lingered longer during staff interactions. His suits, once always black or navy, appeared in lighter tones. And the hotel noticed. Staff whispered about the change. Some assumed he had found a new business partner. Others speculated about a mystery woman. Only Obinna knew the truth, that beneath the layers of status and scars, his son's heart was slowly waking up. And for the first time in years, it wasn't because of a merger or $1 million deal. It was because of a girl in a laundry room who read romance novels and treated everyone with dignity. The transformation had begun. And though Maxwell didn't yet know it, he was standing at the edge of a love that might just save his life. As Maxwell's attention toward Amara became more visible, whispers began to ripple through the corridors of the Imperial. While most staff quietly admired the unexpected closeness between the billionaire and the laundry worker, not everyone welcomed it. Among the loudest of the silent enemies was Sandra, whose bruised ego refused to accept the idea that someone like Amara could outshine her. She had invested time, energy and vanity into crafting an image tailored to Maxwell's taste, and yet he barely noticed her now. The humiliation stung deeply. To her, Amara was nothing more than a low-level worker with a tragic background, and watching her rise into Maxwell's orbit ignited a bitterness that refused to be quieted. Sandra didn't confront her directly, not yet. She decided to do what the cunning often do when threatened: sabotage. If she couldn't win Maxwell's affection, she would make sure the one who had it would be discredited and destroyed. Sandra began small, spreading whispers in the staff lounge. "You know Amara's child doesn't even have a father, right?" she said one afternoon, loud enough for ears that mattered to hear. "I heard she's been trying to trap rich men for years. Maybe Mr. Okoye is just the latest victim." The rumors slithered through the halls like smoke. Supervisors became wary. One morning, Amara was called in by the hotel's HR department and questioned about her interactions with guests, specifically Maxwell. "We've received concerns," they said vaguely, refusing to name sources. Amara, stunned and humiliated, denied any impropriety. She explained how she had only spoken to Mr. Okoye at his request and never behaved inappropriately. But the seed had been planted. That afternoon, her access to certain floors was revoked. Her shifts were abruptly changed. Fellow workers started treating her differently, not with open hostility but with suspicion. And through it all, Sandra smiled, pretending to be supportive while fanning the flames in secret. Obinna noticed the changes immediately. Amara's eyes, once calm and steady, now held a flicker of unease. She worked faster, avoided conversations and kept her head lower than usual. It infuriated him. She had done nothing wrong, yet she was being punished for simply being kind and genuine. That night, he confronted a trusted supervisor and dug into the rumors. It didn't take long to trace the malicious gossip back to Sandra. Obinna knew she needed to be dealt with, but carefully. He couldn't reveal himself yet. Instead, he started gathering his own evidence. Conversations. CCTV footage. Internal reports. He would not let Amara be ruined by envy. Maxwell too began to sense the tension. When he asked Amara if everything was okay, she simply smiled and said, "It's just been a rough week." That answer hurt more than it should have. He realized, maybe for the first time, how much he wanted to protect her, not as a friend but as something more. And that realization was both thrilling and terrifying. It was just past noon when Obinna saw Amara standing by the staff elevator, her hands trembling slightly as she read through a formal warning letter issued by the hotel's HR department. Her eyes were glassy, and her lips moved in silent disbelief. He approached slowly, his cleaning cart creaking beside him. "Are you okay, my daughter?" he asked gently. She looked up, startled. "It's nothing, Mr. Ben," she said, forcing a smile. "Just a misunderstanding." He reached out and touched her shoulder softly, fatherly. "Sometimes the good ones suffer before they're seen for who they truly are." She smiled faintly, but the pain didn't fade. Obinna knew she was on the edge, not of quitting but of breaking. And he couldn't allow that. Not when she had done nothing wrong. That afternoon he left the cleaning wing and climbed 2 floors to speak with a trusted old friend, Mr. Jide, the hotel's regional operations manager. One of the few who knew Obinna's real identity and had sworn to keep the secret. Obinna didn't reveal everything but shared just enough. A good girl is being targeted because someone feels threatened, he said. She's honest, hardworking, and doesn't deserve this. Jide, loyal to the core, nodded. I'll fix it quietly, he promised. That night, a quiet internal investigation began. HR was instructed to re-review the allegations against Amara. Within 48 hours, it was discovered that all complaints stemmed from anonymous tips traced to a single source, Sandra. Jide didn't fire her outright. Instead, he suspended her and flagged her profile across all hotel branches. Meanwhile, Amara received an apology in the form of a subtle promotion, a temporary reassignment to the front-end hospitality support team, a role that allowed her to roam more freely and interact with executive-level operations. She was shocked when the notice came through but accepted it, assuming it was just a reassignment to balance scheduling. What she didn't know was that Obinna had paved the way, silently protecting her like the father she never had. Maxwell noticed the change almost instantly. He saw her helping a concierge with room coordination, her steps unsure but determined. You've been moved? He asked one morning in the lobby. Just for a while, she said. They said I've been doing well. He smiled and looked at her more deeply. They're right. For the first time, Amara saw something soften in his eyes, a gentleness that went beyond curiosity. That afternoon, he invited her to join him for tea in the garden, casually, as if it were no big deal. She hesitated but agreed. Obinna watched from a distance, hidden behind a marble pillar, heart swelling. This wasn't a business transaction. This wasn't a man being seduced. This was the beginning of something real. And as he returned to his quarters that night, he whispered a quiet prayer of thanks. For now Amara was safe. But more than that, she was seen. The garden atop the Imperial was a sanctuary built high above the noise of Lagos. Lush flowers curled along wrought iron trellises, and the scent of jasmine danced with the wind. It was here that Maxwell and Amara sat, a small round table between them, warm tea in their hands. It was an unusual setting for Amara. She felt out of place among the ornate planters and expensive outdoor decor, but Maxwell made it feel almost normal. He didn't speak in boardroom language or tower over her with arrogance. Instead, he asked questions with genuine interest. What was her favorite color? What was the happiest moment of her life? What made her laugh? Slowly, her nervousness melted away and she began to answer honestly. She told him about Chibik, about how motherhood changed her, about the time he danced in the rain and called it a miracle shower. Maxwell laughed. A real laugh, not the polite chuckles he gave shareholders or sycophants. As the conversation deepened, Maxwell found himself revealing things he hadn't shared in years. He spoke about his mother, how her warmth had kept their home alive even when his father worked non-stop. He admitted how lonely success could be, how every new achievement felt a little more hollow without someone to share it with. People think being rich means being happy, he said, staring into the steam rising from his cup. But sometimes, it just means more people want things from you, not for you. Amara didn't respond with sympathy or awe. She simply said, that's why you need people who want nothing from you but your time. That moment hit him like a wave. He looked at her and realized something profound. She wasn't trying to impress him. She wasn't trying at all. She was just being herself. And that, to a man used to performances, was everything. They stayed in the garden long after the sun dipped below the skyline, their voices mingling with the wind. When it was time to leave, Maxwell walked her to the elevator himself. As the doors opened, he hesitated. Would it be okay if we did this again? He asked. Amara's eyes widened slightly, then she nodded. I'd like that. The doors closed and Maxwell stood there for a while, his heart pounding in a way it hadn't since he was a teenager. In his suite that night he didn't check the stock markets. He didn't review quarterly projections. Instead he lay back on his bed and stared at the ceiling, smiling. Meanwhile, Obinna watched from his quarters, eyes misty. The bridge had finally formed, not from manipulation but from sincerity. His son was no longer just curious. He was invested. And love, the real kind, had taken its first true step. The storm came quietly. No thunder. No warning. Just the click of a flash drive entering a laptop. Obinna had watched long enough, heard the lies, seen the manipulation, and felt the weight of injustice against the innocent. So when he handed Mr. Jide the carefully compiled footage of the rude, two-faced women tormenting staff and faking affection for Maxwell, it was not an act of vengeance, but of justice. The footage contained undeniable proof: Sandra's venomous rants when she thought no one was listening, her threats to junior staff, her mocking laughter after insulting Obinna himself. Other women too were captured showing cruelty toward elderly workers and disabled cleaners, only to straighten their posture and soften their voices the moment Maxwell entered the room. The contrast was damning. Jide didn't need much convincing. With quiet authority, he arranged for the content to be reviewed by the hotel's board and shared confidentially with Maxwell's core team. The fallout, though executed discreetly, was seismic. Maxwell watched the tapes late into the evening in his private office. Alone. The dim light cast long shadows as the screen flickered with scenes that left his stomach in knots. These were the same women who smiled so sweetly, touched his arm with rehearsed warmth, and called him darling, like it meant something. But now their performances were stripped bare. He saw them snap at staff, shove trays, and laugh at a disabled guest trying to find his way. The worst part wasn't their behavior, it was the realization that he had come so close to letting one of them into his life. For a man like Maxwell, who trusted few and loved fewer, this betrayal, even if only narrowly avoided, was personal. He closed his laptop with a cold finality. The next morning, memos were quietly sent. Invitations revoked. Access cards deactivated. Maxwell never explained and no one dared to ask. The women in question received the message loud and clear. Their influence was gone. And just like that, the Golden Gate slammed shut. The rest of the staff noticed the shift almost immediately. The once powerful ladies who strutted through the hotel in designer gowns now left quietly, their faces tight with fury. A new atmosphere settled over the Imperial, one of caution but also curiosity. Who had exposed them? And why? Rumors swirled, but no one could trace the storm's eye. Meanwhile, Amara, blissfully unaware of her role in the unfolding narrative, continued to carry out her duties. She was now regarded with a kind of quiet respect. Her quiet grace, once ignored, now shone brighter in the absence of the pretenders. Obinna in the shadows watched it all unfold. He had given Maxwell the clarity he needed without ever saying a word. The truth had spoken for itself. And now, with the stage cleared of fakes and flatterers, the real story could finally begin. A story of heart, not glamour. A story where love would not be performed but earned. Amara's reassignment came with perks she had never experienced before. More flexible hours, better uniforms, and the occasional chance to speak to guests without being scolded by a manager. Still, she remained humble. She didn't let the change go to her head. Even when other staff whispered about her new closeness to Maxwell, she kept her eyes on her work and her heart grounded in gratitude. One afternoon, as she helped arrange a welcome package in the penthouse suite, she found herself thinking about Mr. Ben. It had been days since she saw the old cleaner. He used to stop by and greet her with a smile or ask about her son. But now he seemed to have vanished. Concerned, she asked another janitor where he had gone. The reply was casual: he took some time off. Personal reasons. But something didn't sit right. That evening she packed some food in a small container, jollof rice and fried plantain, and wandered to the staff quarters hoping to find him. What she found instead was a locked room and silence. Meanwhile, Obinna was watching from the hotel's security room, observing staff activity under the guise of maintenance checks. When he saw Amara waiting patiently outside his door, her food container resting gently on her lap, something in him cracked. He had spent decades surrounded by world leaders and power brokers, but this simple act of kindness, a woman bringing dinner to a man she thought was a poor cleaner, felt like the richest moment of his life. He instructed one of the guards to tell her he'd returned home to take care of a sick relative. She accepted the explanation without suspicion, leaving the food on the doorstep with a note: "Take care of yourself, Mr. Ben. Let me know if you need anything. Amara." The message touched him deeper than she could know. In a world where people only asked for things, she offered. That was all the confirmation he needed. Back in the executive suite, Maxwell sat with his thoughts swirling. His growing feelings for Amara scared him. Not because she was from a different world, he could navigate that, but because it felt so real, so unguarded. For the first time in years, he wasn't in control. He didn't know how to define what they were. He didn't even know what she felt for him. Was it gratitude? Respect? Or something deeper? Then came the moment that sealed his decision. During a scheduled fire drill, staff and guests were escorted outside. Amid the confusion, Amara noticed that Mr. Ben's room was left locked with lights still on. She rushed to notify security, fearing he had collapsed inside. Maxwell overheard the concern and asked why she cared so much about an old cleaner. Her response was simple: because he's human. And he matters. That night, Maxwell stood before his mirror, adjusting his tie, and told his reflection, "She's not like the rest. And I won't lose her." Maxwell had never felt more torn. His heart pulled him one way, but the weight of public image, family expectations, and years of ingrained caution tugged him another. He paced his office, hands in pockets, eyes unfocused. Falling in love wasn't the plan. Certainly not with someone whose world was so different from his. But every time he tried to talk himself out of it, reminding himself of the risks, the tabloids, the backlash, Amara's voice echoed in his mind. Her honesty, her empathy, the way she spoke of her son like he was a treasure, not a burden. It wasn't just about attraction anymore. It was about something deeper. Something he hadn't felt since his mother died, a sense of home. Still, he knew what people would say. That she was after his money. That she had planned it all. That she had used her son to gain sympathy. The harshness of the world's opinion loomed like a storm on the horizon, threatening to destroy the peace he had finally found. He turned to the only person he could talk to without filters, his father. Or so he thought. That evening he called Obinna, who still kept up the illusion of being far from the hotel, and asked if they could speak. Obinna met him in the rooftop garden, dressed again as the wise old man, Mr. Ben. It was the first time Maxwell truly looked at him, at the wrinkles, the steady eyes, the slow gait. You ever feel like you're losing your grip? Maxwell asked, sitting heavily on a bench. Obinna smiled faintly. Only when I try to hold on too tightly. Maxwell chuckled. Then he spoke. There's this woman, Mara. She's different, real. But I'm afraid. Afraid of what people will say. Afraid I'll ruin her life by pulling her into mine. Obinna listened quietly, nodding slowly. The world will always talk. What matters is who listens. If she listens to your heart, and you listen to hers, the noise won't matter. Maxwell turned to him, eyes heavy. How do I know if it's real? Obinna leaned forward. Because she's not asking you for anything, and you want to give her everything. That night, Maxwell sat alone in his suite, thinking about his father's words. He knew he was right. Amara had never once asked for anything, not gifts, not help, not promises. She just showed up, did her job, and carried her struggles with grace. And yet, she had given him so much perspective, peace, and something that resembled hope. The walls around his heart began to crumble. He made a decision. He wouldn't let fear dictate his future. He would take the leap despite the risk. But first he needed to make sure Amara felt the same. And he needed to earn it, not through wealth, not through power, but through presence. So the next morning, as the sun climbed over Lagos and lit up the city like fire, Maxwell walked into the hotel kitchen, rolled up his sleeves, and began helping the staff prepare breakfast. Everyone watched in stunned silence. The CEO was in their space not for show but for love. The day began like any other, with sunlight piercing the blinds of Obinna's modest staff room. But within moments of waking, he knew something was wrong. His chest was tight, not in the usual dull way but with a sharpness that stole his breath. He struggled to sit up, sweat pooling on his brow. He reached for his medication, the tiny white pills that had become lifelines, but his hand trembled so violently that they scattered across the floor. A quiet moan escaped his lips. For years he had defied his age, his illness, his limitations, all to orchestrate this final mission. But now his body was calling the bill. With all the strength he could muster, he pressed the emergency button wired discreetly into his watch, one of the only luxuries he allowed himself in disguise. Within minutes, security was at his door. Call Mr. Maxwell, one of them whispered urgently after seeing who lay on the bed. Now. Obinna faded in and out of consciousness as he was rushed through the hotel service entrance, unseen by guests, escorted to a private clinic suite prepared for such emergencies. The empire he built had always protected him, but this time it felt fragile, because it wasn't money he feared losing. It was time. When Maxwell arrived at the clinic, his heart dropped at the sight before him. His father, pale and frail, hooked up to machines, looked like a shadow of the man who had taught him strength. He hadn't even known his father had returned to Lagos. Obinna's assistant, Tund, pulled him aside and whispered the truth. He never left. He's been here, sir. Disguised. Working as a cleaner at the Imperial. Maxwell blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. What? Tund nodded, eyes misty. He came to find you a wife, sir. A real one. Before he goes. The words hit Maxwell like a blow to the chest. Every moment of the past weeks, the reappearance of Mr. Ben, the quiet wisdom, the strange coincidences, snapped into focus. It wasn't just a cleaner guiding him. It was his father. The man who had watched from the shadows, testing the people around him, shielding Amara, and slowly pushing Maxwell toward her. Anger, guilt, awe, and heartbreak all fought inside him as he stepped into the room, dropped into a chair beside his father's bed, and gripped his hand tightly. "Why didn't you tell me?" he whispered. Obina's lips curled faintly. "Would you have listened?" For a long time neither of them spoke. Machines beeped softly, and the scent of antiseptic hung in the air. Maxwell felt the ache of every moment he had missed, the years lost in ambition, the moments where pride had built walls between them. Obina finally opened his eyes again, blinking slowly. "Did you find her?" he asked, voice hoarse. Maxwell nodded. "Yes. You were right about her." Obina smiled weakly, his fingers barely tightening around his son's. "Then my work is done." But Maxwell shook his head. "Not yet. I want you to see it. To witness it. I don't just want your approval, I want your blessing." Obina's eyes glistened. He had always been proud of his son's strength. But in that moment he was prouder of his vulnerability. It meant Maxwell had learned the most valuable lesson. Love in its truest form wasn't about control, it was about presence. And though his body was fading, Obina's heart was full. The seed he had planted had not only bloomed, it was about to bear fruit. The news of Obina's illness shook the Imperial from its foundations. Only a select few learned the truth, that the frail old cleaner known as Mr. Ben, was in fact Chief Obina Okoye, father to the world's richest man. The revelation, once confirmed, sent waves of disbelief and guilt through the hotel staff. Those who had ignored him, spoken rudely, or dismissed his presence now realized the gravity of their actions. But the most shaken was Amara. When Maxwell called her into his suite, his face unreadable, she feared she had done something wrong. But instead, he stood by the window and said quietly, "Do you remember Mr. Ben?" She nodded, eyes softening. "Of course. I've been worried about him." Maxwell turned to her then, gaze searching. "He's not who you think he is." And with that, he told her everything, the disguise, the mission, the tests. Amara sat down slowly, her knees trembling. "You're saying he's your father?" Maxwell nodded. "He came here to find someone who would love me, not the billionaire me, just me." Amara was stunned into silence. Her mind replayed every interaction, every laugh, every conversation, every meal she had shared with Mr. Ben. It all made sense now, the wisdom in his words, the kindness in his eyes, the strange influence he seemed to have behind the scenes. "I feel like such a fool," she whispered. "He trusted me and I didn't even know who he was." Maxwell moved closer. "You weren't a fool. You were real. That's why he chose you." The room grew quiet again, the weight of truth settling over them both. Amara looked up. "How is he?" Maxwell's face fell slightly. "We don't know how long he has. But he wants to see us, together. He wants to know what he did wasn't in vain." Amara stood, emotion brimming. "Then take me to him." And just like that, the woman who had once folded towels and sorted linens was walking beside the world's most powerful man, not as a servant, but as someone worthy of his love. At the clinic, Obina's face lit up the moment Amara walked in. She approached slowly, tears in her eyes. "You lied to me," she whispered, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "But I forgive you." Obina chuckled weakly. "A good lie, I hope?" She nodded and knelt beside him. "You were kind when no one else was watching. You cared. Thank you." Maxwell stood behind her, watching the two people he loved most connect in a way he hadn't anticipated. "We wanted your blessing," he said softly. Obina looked at both of them, his eyes watery. "Then take it. You have it. With all that I am." That night plans were made. Not for a grand wedding, not yet, but for a ceremony of commitment. One that would take place beside a hospital bed, under low lights and high hopes. The love story that had begun in secret was finally stepping into the light. It was a quiet ceremony, no gold-plated invitations, no flash of cameras, no designer gowns flown in from Paris. Just the soft hum of monitors, a bouquet of hand-picked garden flowers, and two people standing hand in hand beside a hospital bed. Maxwell wore a simple white shirt and navy trousers, nothing like the tailored suits the world knew him for. Amara wore a lavender dress lent to her by one of the hotel's receptionists, her hair pulled back in a modest bun. Obina lay propped up by pillows, his eyes glowing with pride. Tun stood near the window, recording the moment not with a professional camera, but with a phone and shaking hands. A retired pastor, longtime family friend, was flown in quietly to officiate. "Do you, Maxwell Chibiko Okoye, take Amara Nwachukwu to be your partner in this journey of life?" he asked. Maxwell looked into her eyes, his voice strong. "I do. With all I am." Amara, trembling, replied the same. And with that, vows were exchanged, not just of love but of truth. Obina cried as he watched them kiss. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just quiet tears that rolled down weathered cheeks and soaked into the sheets. He reached out weakly and took Amara's hand. "Thank you," he said, "for loving my son." She squeezed his hand gently. "Thank you, for seeing me." A few minutes later, the door opened and a little boy with bright eyes peeked in. "Chibik," Amara called softly. Maxwell knelt and opened his arms, and the child ran into them. It was the first time he'd been invited into this part of the hotel, and his wonder was evident. He looked around, then at the man holding him. "Are you my daddy now?" he asked, innocence dripping from every word. Maxwell's voice cracked. "If you'll have me." Chibik nodded and hugged him tighter. The room, that sterile, quiet place, became the warmest place in the world. Obinna smiled and closed his eyes, whispering, "My legacy is safe." That night, the hotel staff gathered quietly outside the clinic. Candles were lit, prayers whispered. Word had spread. The billionaire had married a laundry worker. The richest man on earth had chosen love over luxury. But more than that, the man who had once ruled industries had knelt before a boy and asked to be his father. Obinna watched it all from his bed, surrounded by warmth. The pain in his chest was heavier now. The doctors said the time was near. But he wasn't afraid. He had seen what he came to see. His son had found a woman of substance, and his grandson had found a father. He didn't need more time, he had fulfilled his purpose. And as the stars blinked awake in the Lagos sky, Obinna drifted into sleep with a smile. The world might soon forget his name. But in that small hospital room, the love he built would echo for generations. The morning after the quiet ceremony, the Imperial felt different. Not louder, not more extravagant, just different. There was a stillness in the air that whispered reverence, a collective awe that something sacred had taken place behind closed doors. The staff who had once looked down on Amara now passed her with soft nods, some with shy smiles and others with apologetic eyes. She was no longer just that laundry girl. She was the woman who had captured the heart of Maxwell Okoye. But Amara remained unchanged. She still rose early, still cleaned after herself, still asked the front desk clerks if they'd eaten. Her humility didn't fade with her change in title. If anything, it deepened. Maxwell had offered her everything: a mansion, designer clothes, a team of assistants, but she asked only for two things: a small ceremony her son could understand, and the presence of the man who had brought them together. They had gotten both. Now she turned her attention to something else, helping Maxwell become the father she knew he could be. Maxwell, for his part, threw himself into fatherhood with an intensity that surprised everyone, including himself. He arranged for Chibik's school fees to be paid for the next 10 years, enrolled him in a top-tier early learning program, and spent entire afternoons learning how to braid the boy's hair and read bedtime stories. The boardroom meetings were still there, the international calls, the pressure, but they no longer consumed him. Each day he made space for play, for laughter. 4 quiet walks in the park holding a small hand. The man who once measured his worth in dollars now found joy in coloring books and half-eaten biscuits. The staff often found him and Chibik playing hide and seek in the hotel's private garden, giggling like best friends. Amara watched them often from a distance, her heart full. She had known Maxwell was more than his bank account. But now the world was beginning to see it too. He wasn't just a billionaire anymore. He was a husband, a father, a man transformed by love. Back in the clinic, Obinna's health began to fail more rapidly. The doctors prepared the family for the inevitable, but even they were surprised by how peacefully he bore the decline. He had no regrets, no unfinished business. His last days were filled with music, soft high-life classics from his youth, and the sound of his grandson's laughter echoing down the hallway. One evening, Amara brought Chibik into the room with a handmade card. It read, "I love you, Grandpa. Thank you for my new daddy." Obinna's hands trembled as he held the paper, tears glistening in his eyes. "Come here," he whispered. The boy climbed into his bed, resting beside him as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Maxwell and Amara stood quietly nearby, watching the two generations share a moment too deep for words. Obinna closed his eyes, inhaled deeply, and said, This is what wealth was meant to buy, not things but people who will love you even when it's gone." Obinna passed away in his sleep that night, his breath slow and even, his hand resting gently atop Chibik's. When the nurse found him in the morning, the old man wore a faint smile. There was no struggle, no fear, just the peace of a man who had seen his mission through to the very end. The news of his passing was kept quiet at first, shared only among the family and closest hotel staff. Maxwell requested that his father's death not be announced through press releases or social media. He didn't want headlines, he told Amara. He wanted legacy. And legacy, Maxwell knew now, wasn't built in marble towers or offshore accounts. It was built in the way a man protected those he loved. The way he humbled himself for something greater than pride. So instead of a public funeral, Obinna was laid to rest in a private garden on one of Maxwell's estates. The same garden where he and Amara had first begun to fall in love. A plaque was placed beside a blossoming tree. Chief Obinna Okoye, a father, a visionary, a man of heart. After the burial, Maxwell made changes that shocked the world. He announced a new foundation in his father's name. One dedicated to supporting the education of single mothers and underprivileged children in Nigeria. Amara was appointed the chairwoman. The media had a field day. From laundry room to leadership, the headlines read. Some critics scoffed, claiming it was all PR. But those who knew the story, the real story, stayed silent, smiling. Because they understood. Amara didn't need applause. She needed purpose. Under her guidance, the Obinna Okoye Foundation built libraries in remote villages, funded vocational training for hundreds of women, and opened a children's home named Chibik's Place. As for Maxwell, he stepped back from the daily operations of his empire, handing over more responsibilities to trusted executives. It's time, he said during a quiet board meeting, for me to invest in something money can't buy. Years later, the legend of Obinna's final mission would live on in whispers across the hotel. New staff were told the story of the humble cleaner who was really a billionaire's father. Some believed it. Some thought it was just a fairy tale. But every year, on the anniversary of his passing, Amara and Maxwell returned to the garden with their children. Yes, children, and told them the story of a man who disguised himself to find truth. A man who bent low so his family could rise. And as Chibik, now grown, stood at the tree and read the plaque once more, he understood. Wealth, real wealth, wasn't gold or shares. It was legacy. It was love. And it was the courage to live for something bigger than yourself. As the wind rustled the branches above, the Okoye family held hands and bowed their heads. Obinna was gone. But his love lived on, beneath the roof he built, in the hearts he changed, and in the family he left behind. This is the end of this beautiful story. What did you learn? I must say that it's good to be humble, preserved, and well-mannered. You don't know who might be lurking around waiting to bless you. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel Tales by Tochi for more.